Good evening, everyone. I'm Lyndon Crane, your host for Coffee with Craner, and welcome back to another episode. Today, I have Dwight Duncan joining me on the show. You may know him. He is a five-time MPP in the Windsor area. He's also a former Minister of Finance, former Minister of Energy, was also a government House Leader, and even Deputy Premier of Ontario. Now he's a senior strategic advisor at McMillan. It's one of the biggest Bay Street law firms in Toronto area, and then also the chair of the board of directors at the Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority, or also known as the Gordie Howe International Bridge. He, aside from that, involved with many board roles, including Pure Extracts Corp, Travelers Canada, and then also McMillan Vantage Policy Group. And even this year was executive in residence for the University of Windsor's Odette School of Business. Dwight, thanks for joining me tonight.
Pleasure, Lyndon.
So my favorite question every show, where in Windsor is your favorite place to get coffee?
The Beanery, I guess. I always enjoyed that place. And, Tim Hortons is a regular stopping place, and Starbucks occasionally. But so one local, a couple of big chains.
Yes, it depends how you're feeling.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So Dwight, you were an MPP for 17 years, also a cabinet minister for about a decade. What lessons have you really learned since you left office that I guess you're applying into your many advising roles that you have today?
Well, that's a loaded question, a good one. You come to appreciate the complexity of society and the issues that society has to address, whether they're economic, social in nature, our relationships with other jurisdictions. So you're not quite as, I think you're probably, the lesson I would have learned is to be very thoughtful, not to jump to conclusions. What looks to you from the outside, something's very easy with easy answers, inevitably isn't. And there are complexities that make it challenging. And I've used that experience and whatever wisdom I gained to apply it to the advice I give to various corporate clients, not-for-profits. I serve also as the national treasurer of the MS Society's Scientific Research Foundation. So I guess that is probably the best way I can respond to your question.
And have you been connected with the same individuals when you were in office?
Yes, I was the fellow who hired me at McMillan, who's about to become the CEO of McMillan. He and I first met. We were young students working in the David Peterson government back in the 1980s. He was working with then Education Minister Sean Conway, and I was working for another former local minister, Bill Rye. We became friends then. He went on to become an MPP himself. He didn't stay very long at that, and then he became eventually Chief of Staff to Finance Minister Paul Martin, and then served also as his Chief of Staff, Paul Martin's Chief of Staff, when he was Prime Minister.
Wow, very, very interesting.
Among others. I mean, I'm in contact with a number of my former colleagues, but the challenge, when you're in the legislature, and I imagine it's the same when you sit in the House of Commons, probably even more so, is that your former colleagues are spread out all over the place. So it's hard. It's easier today than it would have been 20 or 30 years ago, but it's harder to stay in sort of close touch.
Definitely. So, I mean, you were finance minister during a very tough time in Canada's history with the 2008-2009 recession, even including things like the automotive sector bailout and really the massive investment in public infrastructure renewal. What parallels have you really seen between that type of government intervention in the economy and how the government today is dealing with the pandemic?
So I guess a couple of things. First of all, when the pandemic started, we thought the economic impact would be much worse than the economic impact resulting from the 08-09 recession. As it turns out, that wasn't the case. That may have been, in fact, due to the good response of governments at all levels to central banks, but they're very different. I remember, after the lockdown began, I realized that there was still a very vibrant economy working. And I did some work with the C.D. Howe Institute. I'm a fellow at the C.D. Howe Institute, and we did a little bit of work in the first month or so. But the thing that most happened, I think, in this downturn, of course, is the impact on supply chain and our ability to import and export and leave the country. And so I guess that would be one thing that certainly we didn't have to deal with. All that being said, the 08-09 recession was precipitated by a man-made event. The deregulation of banks in the U.S., the subprime mortgage failure, the breakdown of the U.S. financial system, which when it first started to unravel, nobody knew where it would end. And it was a very disconcerting time. And by the time I left public office 4 years later, we were still wrestling with the effects of it. And so this one's it's been different. It's been deeper. It's affected less people than we thought, but it's affected some people horribly. Women, it's affected typically, people who work in the service sector more than others. I mean, I was explaining to you earlier, I've been busier than I've ever been. We have demand for our services at McMillan has gone way, way up. And, I'm hearing those stories from a lot of places. But then on the other hand, you've got, really struggling businesses trying to keep afloat. You've got families who rely on earnings from being waiters, waitresses, that sort of thing. And so the impact has been disproportionate on some. And government's going to have to spend some time, I think, in the next couple of years trying to make that right. If not whole, certainly try to make it right. And we'll have to see what responses they have.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so when you were a finance minister in the recession, now, if you were finance minister today during the pandemic, how would you handle it?
I think Chrystia Freeland's done a tremendous job. The federal government has done everything, in my view, that they should have done. They injected, in combination with the Bank of Canada, with federal governments and central banks in other countries, have injected huge amounts of money into the economy to keep it going. It has run up our deficit and our debt. They're going to have to come to terms with that eventually. But once the economy is back into growth, just with relatively modest restraint, I think that they can get things back into better shape and good shape pretty quickly. There's very little I can find at fault with, certainly with the federal government. I think they've done a good deal. I know when we open the border is a very contentious issue with some people right now. Again, the targets they're shooting for, I think, are appropriate. The Delta variant is something we should not take for granted. Hopefully in the coming 3 or 4 weeks, the border will start to open more again. And again, I know that many businesses and individuals have been separated from their families, and businesses not able to maximize their potential. But caution, in my view, given what we still don't know about the virus and the variants, I think is the order of the day. And this will all seem like a bad memory, I think, in a few months. And, God willing, the people that have been separated from their families and others will be reunited sooner rather than later. But I think the Prime Minister and his government are taking absolutely the right approach to this.
And do you see the financial implications lasting for a while?
Some work was done. One of my colleagues, Drew Fagan, who teaches at the Monk School, did a paper last year on, debt and deficit relative to the end of World War II. And we're nowhere near where we were then. And, the impacts of the war on our public finances were huge. And, but they were largely dealt with within 5 or 6 years. And, again, nobody likes to have the debt deficit that we do. It's not ideal, but Canada's relative position is pretty strong. Even when you combine federal and provincial debt and deficits, it's overall we're in pretty good shape. The challenges, I think, the fiscal challenges are going to be Alberta and Newfoundland in the coming years. Alberta, due to the secular decline in the oil and gas business. Newfoundland, due to some, issues around Muskrat Falls and other things. So they're going to be hard hit, and remains to be seen where it's all going to end. But again, Canada's fiscal situation, while it's certainly taxed right at the moment, it's not dire, and it's not without a solution.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I had to ask you, you were a former finance minister. If I didn't ask these questions, I'd be forgetting a whole piece of your experience in office.
Yeah.
But fast forwarding to your role at McMillan now, how did that all start? How did you find yourself at McMillan?
Well, so when I left politics, it all happened relatively quickly. The premier I worked for, Dalton McGuinty, had decided to retire. I had to make a decision as to whether or not I wanted to run for the leadership. I had previously decided that I didn't. I took a couple of days, rethought it, and decided that my original decision was the right one for me. And then you start to think about your options. And I was fortunate, I had a number of approaches from different people, and I wound up taking McMillan as one of them, and I did some work with a major pension fund, a major private equity firm, and a couple of others. So I had an abundance, and all the work other than McMillan eventually wrapped up, and I've adjusted my working life to McMillan. I do a number of corporate boards, including Travelers Insurance, and that keeps me pretty darn occupied. And as I said, I serve as the national treasurer of the MS Society's research foundation.
How are you balancing it all?
It's been quite easy during the pandemic without the commute and without all the travel that I was used to. It's not that difficult. There are points in time where it gets pretty busy. But frankly, one of the reasons I've decided to step down as chair of the WDBA was that it eats an enormous amount of time. It's a very important project. It's very big. Got a terrific management team there, a terrific board. And I just decided that things are in pretty good shape. And I've been at it for 6 years now, and it was just time to let someone else come in, and that remains to be seen who that person will be. But new set of eyes, new set of ears as we move into the major construction period of the project. It's important to have somebody fresh and somebody who wants to make the time commitment and so on that's involved. As you get older, you want to spend less time working and more time traveling and doing golf and things like that. Lyndon, you're far too young to appreciate it yet, but someday you'll know that. I'll be kicking up daisies when that happens. But the fact is that there's more to life than politics.
Mm-hmm.
And work.
So you must be a golfer.
I am. Yeah, not a very good one, but I am. And I took it up relatively late in life. I remember I grew up near Roseland Golf Course, and my mom always used to say to me, why don't you go and golf like your friends, and she'd name off my friends who golfed a lot. And I said, golf's for old men. And I said, I'll take it up when I'm older, which is what I wound up doing, but I should have listened to her. Let that be a lesson. Always listen to your mother. Don't take her wisdom for granted. But yes, I do golf. I enjoy it, and I spend a lot of time at it.
So mothers always know best.
In my case, that was certainly true.
Awesome. Now, would you ever, I guess, consider running again, anything like that, or are you more, relaxing now?
No, once in a while I'll see something, or I'll see a politician, regardless of party, say or do something that sounds absolutely stupid or something that I think is wrong, and I'll think, I could do better than that. But politics is a vocation, not so much a job. It's a vocation. And when you go into it, you have to go into it full steam. And that's one of the reasons why back in 2012 and early 2013, I didn't run for the leadership of our party. I was kind of, by then, having worked through the recession and all the various roles, I'd had enough. And I found it even difficult, keeping up with my local commitments. And, when it gets to that point, you got to say it's time for somebody else. And I made that decision. It's one I've never regretted. I left the door open at the time to running federally, and I looked very seriously at running in the 2015 election, but I opted against it again. I worked on that campaign. I did debate prep with Prime Minister Trudeau, English language debate prep. My French wasn't good enough, but I did English language debate prep with the Prime Minister, provided a little bit of advice to the campaign here and there. Another local resident or former resident, I don't know if you've had her on your show, is Jody Butts. Her and her husband are good friends of mine, and obviously very close to the Trudeaus. And Jerry actually introduced me to, I'll call him Justin because he was Justin then. And I was one of the early people involved in his campaign for the party leadership.
Wow. Something I didn't know. And yes, Jody was on the show before. She's fantastic.
Yeah, she's great. Grew up in Windsor.
Yes. What got you started into politics in the first place?
My formative years were the 1960s, which was a time of student activism, political activism, very different from today. My heroes growing up were people like John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Pierre Trudeau, and it just came to me naturally. And in 1972, Pierre Trudeau came to Windsor and did a campaign rally at Devonshire Mall. And unbeknownst to my parents, I cut school that afternoon, made my way over to the mall, forced my way up to the front of the rope line, and standing there with my little pen and paper, I wanted to get his autograph, and he walked right by me. I mean, he couldn't even see me. I was so small compared to all the people around me and people. But Herb Gray saw me, and he saw me holding the pen and paper, and he said, "Quick," he says, "write your name and your address, and I'll get you an autograph." So I scribbled my name and my address down and handed it to him. It went in his coat pocket. And the next morning, I got a phone call from Mr. Gray's campaign headquarters saying, would I like to come in and volunteer on the campaign? And I did. I rousted my dad out of bed. He drove me down, and I went in. And as I like to remind Herb throughout the rest of his life, I never did get my autograph. But that is the true story of how I first got involved in former politics.
Wow, very, very cool story. But there must have been some issue in your community that really got you off the edge of your seat.
No, it was more. It was more a view that politics is something you could do to change the world and you can make people's
Hmm.
lives better. Again, I think you really have to understand the times when I was growing up and, in the 1960s, and, everything from the assassination of President Kennedy to the Vietnam War, the student uprising and unrest, not only in the United States, but in Canada. And I think I read every book that was written on John F. Kennedy after he died. And all this had a very profound impact on me. And, and then this goes back to the notion of politics as a vocation, not a job. It was Paul Martin Sr. that told me that. And that was, and Paul Martin Sr.'s point of view was always something along the lines that next to the priesthood, it's the most important vocation. Views have probably changed on that in more modern times, but it is a vocation. You don't go into it to make money. You don't go into it with any guarantees of success, but you have to be inspired. And in my case, it wasn't a specific issue. It wasn't, I remember a few things that affected my thinking. The Vietnam War on the U.S. side. And of course, that impacted Windsor tremendously. The relationship between the two founding cultures in Canada, the French and English, that was a huge issue at the time. The FLQ crisis of 1970, just the Canadian experiment and how successful it seemed to me to be relative to other parts of the world, that we could live in peace. And so it was just a whole bunch of things like that, as opposed to, some people do get motivated by an issue and then they realize, gee, I like this and I like being part of this. And I must say, I always like being in the center of the ring. But it wasn't just one thing. It was this whole bunch of things came together. I'm sorry, Lyndon, you're on mute.
Yes, no, it was interesting to hear that. What really inspired you to jump in, and the story with Pierre Elliott Trudeau and at the rally and you skipping school. Very interesting.
And my friends who know me from back then, and I was fortunate. I knew at a very young age that I wanted to be in politics. I didn't know where, I didn't know what position, I didn't know how. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can be involved. But I knew at a very young age, and I was one of those lucky people that knew very young kind of what his calling was.
And this entire episode is we're talking about your career in politics, out of politics. What's next after what you're doing now? What are you looking forward to?
It's funny. I'm actually reflecting on that, because it's now been it'll be 8 years in February since I left politics, and I've had a good run and I've decided to move on from being chair of the WDBA. So I'm kind of reflecting on what else is there to do. I'm certainly not going to retire. I can't envision myself ever fully retiring unless I'm forced to for health reasons or whatever. But so there's more life in me. I was reflecting on the fact today that, the President of the United States is almost 80 years old. The head of state in the United Kingdom is 93 years old. Again, and Lawrence Martin had a great piece in the Globe today that talked about, how we elect far too many inexperienced people, and people who haven't got the right training for some of the jobs. And he compared, certain leaders against other leaders. He, for instance, compared, Stephen Harper to Jean Chrétien. Chrétien had, I forget, he held 11 cabinet portfolios before he became prime minister. Harper had never really had a job other than as an MP for a few years and as an economist. And there's going to be work for old guys, I think, and We can learn a lot from young people. There's no question the world's very different. But so I don't know. But I'm open, and aside from probably not ever wanting to run for public office again, there's probably a lot of different things I'm willing to try.
Well, I'm excited to see what's next for you, Dwight, and it's been great seeing your name in the news and all the great things that you're doing with the WDBA here in Windsor, and all the past things that you've done for our community. So I really want to just thank you for joining me tonight and sharing some insights into the world of politics, what you're doing now, and what it was like when you were in it. So thanks for being on the show, and to those who are tuning in, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Lyndon, and keep up the good work.
Thanks so much. Take care, everyone.
Okay.